Hello and welcome to Firstpost America, your home for the biggest stories shaping the US and the world. I'm Cary, Johnston, live from the Firstpost studios. Our top story on the show today. Will NATO's new mission in the Arctic be enough to freeze Donald Trump's repeated threats to take over Greenland? Also on the program, the sky-high mystery over a Texas airport shutdown. Was it a drone or a secret military test? US lawmakers passed a bill warning China of financial isolation over any action on self-ruled Taiwan. And Russia clamps down on WhatsApp and Telegram, the latest move in Moscow's long-running battle against big tech. NATO has just made a major move in the Arctic, and it's happening at a very sensitive moment. Because only a month ago, Donald Trump shocked Europe by threatening to take over Greenland, a semi-autonomous territory belonging to Denmark, which is a NATO ally. Well, now, the military bloc is responding with a new security effort called Arctic Sentry. It's designed to strengthen control in the high north, where Russia is expanding and China is quietly stepping in. But here's the key detail. Arctic Sentry is not a NATO military operation. It does not mean NATO is sending permanent troops into the Arctic under one unified flag. Instead, it's essentially a new NATO label that brings together multiple national military exercises already happening in the region. Well, that includes Denmark's Arctic endurance drills and Norway's major winter training exercise named Cold Response. So why launch Arctic Sentry now? Well, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte explained that NATO will, for the first time, bring all Arctic activity under one command. This would help NATO identify security gaps and figure out what the alliance is missing in the Arctic. And he was blunt about the threat from Russia and China.
In the face of Russia's increased military activity and China's growing interest in the high north, it was crucial that we do more. Which is why we have just 2 hours ago launched Arctic Sentry. Arctic Sentry leverages the strengths of the alliance by bringing together NATO and allied activities in the high north into one overarching operational approach to the region.
He described Arctic Sentry as a multi-domain activity, meaning it will include coordination across land, air, sea, and possibly cyber and surveillance systems. Several countries are already stepping forward. The United Kingdom announced that it will double the number of British troops deployed to Norway over the next 3 years to 2,000 soldiers. Some will take part in a planned drill called Exercise Lion Protector in September. Denmark's defence minister promised that Copenhagen would contribute substantially to Arctic Sentry, and Germany also confirmed it will send an initial 4 Eurofighter jets to participate. Finland, which shares a massive 1,340-kilometre border with Russia, praised the initiative, calling it a strengthening of Arctic security. But will NATO actually deploy major new military capabilities, or is this mostly about coordination and messaging? Well, NATO's Arctic Sentry activities will be coordinated through its US headquarters in Norfolk, Virginia. It will reinforce the fact that Washington remains the operational backbone of the alliance, even when Trump's politics complicate it. Because Trump's Greenland threat overshadows all these efforts. His claim that Greenland is needed to counter Russia and China pushed NATO into a deep crisis. Trump later backed off, saying he had reached a framework deal with Rutte for greater American influence. Well, now, European allies are hoping that Arctic Sentry helps NATO move past that drama. Well, the Arctic is no longer a quiet frontier. Its resources are becoming more accessible as climate change melts the ice. When the world's biggest military alliance starts organizing under a new command there, it means that the competition to control those resources is only hotting up. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Rasmus Sondergaard, a senior researcher at the Danish Institute for International Studies, live now from Copenhagen. Welcome to the programme. So will Arctic Sentry, do you think, be enough to fend off pressure from Donald Trump when it comes to the ownership of Greenland?
Time will tell, but it's the right question to ask because even though we hear from NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte that this is about sort of countering Russian and Chinese presence in the Arctic, we all know that the timing of this NATO exercise is driven by Trump's interest in Greenland. So this is the real question to ask. Will this be enough to freeze Donald Trump's interest in Greenland? And time will tell. But certainly this NATO exercise helps counter some of Trump's arguments, namely that the Arctic is unprotected and that Chinese and Russian activities are not being countered. Now NATO is stepping up to counter those activities, thereby removing one of Trump's arguments for why he needs control over Greenland.
Well, yes, he says unprotected, as you mentioned there. So to what extent will European countries be reassessing their own security, especially when it comes to how much they spend on defense?
Well, we heard back at the latest NATO summit in The Hague back in May last year, of course, that all NATO members, with the exception of Spain, committed to increasing their defense spending to 5% of GDP, reaching that target in 2035. Some countries reaching it sooner. Lots of countries have already passed the 3% mark on defense spending. So we are witnessing European NATO members stepping up defense spending after decades of under-investing in this area. And again, this is of course driven by European security assessment and the threat of Russia and war in Ukraine, but for some countries also partly because of the situation in the Arctic and Trump's interest in Greenland.
And with all of this then, what will Russia and China be making of this NATO maneuver? How might they respond?
Well, for decades, there's been this notion that the Arctic was supposed to be a non-militarized region and a zone of peace, etc. But because of the intensified Russian and Chinese presence in the Arctic, not around Greenland so much, but more around Alaska and the Bering Strait, because of those increased Chinese and Russian activities, they have contributed to turning the Arctic into more of a security zone. And what we're seeing now is a belated, but I think very welcome and timely NATO response to this by increasing our presence. And of course, Russia, China will not welcome this development, but it is a development that they themselves have contributed to.
Rasmus Sondergaard, we appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Now let's shift our focus to Texas, where a sudden El Paso International Airport shutdown lasting 2 days has raised serious questions. What happened at the airport is not fully clear, and the explanations don't seem to match. Well, later on Tuesday night, US aviation officials closed the airspace over El Paso. All flights were stopped. The order was meant to last 10 days. It covered a large area around the city, and pilots were warned to stay away for security reasons.
When I called the airline in the morning, they told me the airport would close for 10 days, and I have my flight now after midday.
But then just hours later, the restriction was lifted. Flights slowly returned, and confusion began to grow. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said the shutdown happened after a Cartel drone entered US airspace. The Federal Aviation Administration said it had flown in from Mexico. He claimed authorities acted fast and that the threat had been neutralized. It sounded like a serious border security scare, but local leaders were not convinced. Several US representatives said the story just did not add up.
We're waking up with a little bit of shock to the airspace closure of the 23rd largest airport in the country. But for any of us who live and work along the border, daily drone incursions by criminal organizations is everyday life for us. It's a Wednesday for us. So I was surprised, like many others.
Then another version of events started to emerge. Several US media reports suggested the shutdown was linked to a military test, saying the Pentagon was testing a new anti-drone system near an airbase close to the airport. Aviation officials were worried. They feared the system could interfere with civilian flights.
You cannot restrict airspace over a major city without coordinating with the city, the airport, the hospitals, the community leadership, that failure to communicate is unacceptable.
That created tension between defense officials and aviation regulators. So, to avoid any risk, flights were stopped. Now, several US media reports even suggested that the device, which was deployed to counter the alleged drone, was a type of laser. But it later turned out to be nothing more than a party balloon. Well, Mexico also pushed back on the claims. President Claudia Sheinbaum said her government was investigating, but that there was no evidence of Mexican drones crossing the border.
There were reports the airport was closed due to the use of drones by a cartel.
There is no information about drone use at the border.
What do you think really happened?
We shouldn't speculate. We will get the information. And we will continue to do what we have always done, which is maintain constant communication.
Well, the shutdown briefly affected a busy border city. The last time such major restrictions were seen was after 9/11 attacks. El Paso has nearly 700,000 residents, and a closure like this is rare, so many were caught off guard.
I
had a flight at 6 in the morning, and it affected me. And now I'm going to see if there's going to be a flight from Dallas to South Carolina.
Well, experts say drones near the border are not unusual. Drug cartels are known to use them for surveillance and smuggling. But shutting down a major city's airspace for several days is almost unheard of. That's why the sudden order shocked so many people. So for now, flights are back. The skies over El Paso are open again. But one big question remains. Was it a drone threat from across the border? Or was the intruder coming from within? Well, still to come on the program, sporting a racist backlash. The Microsoft CEO faces a wave of online hate after calling Seattle his hometown. But first, the US House of Representatives has passed a sweeping new bill aimed squarely at China and indicating strong support for Taiwan, the self-ruled island Beijing calls its own. The Protect Taiwan Act cleared the House in an overwhelming 395-2 vote. It will next head to the Senate. If approved and signed by the President, it becomes law. Once enacted, the bill can be triggered if the White House determines that Taiwan faces an imminent threat or one that endangers US interests. If that happens, Washington would be required to seek China's exclusion from key global financial bodies, the G20, the Bank for International Settlements, the Financial Stability Board, and other major multilateral regulatory institutions. In effect, it would attempt to isolate China from the very architecture of the global economic order. Well, supporters say the model does have precedent. When Russia began its offensive on Ukraine in 2022, the West responded with sweeping sanctions and financial restrictions. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill argue that Beijing should expect similar consequences if it moves against Taiwan.
The United States' response to an invasion of Taiwan should be robust and include numerous sanctions and economic penalties. Exclusion from international bodies must be part of that response. If China seeks to disrupt the global order, then China cannot continue to be party to international organizations that seek to preserve that order. China's position at multilateral economic institutions will be at risk should they engage in hostilities toward Taiwan.
Beijing considers Taiwan a breakaway province and has never ruled out the use of force to bring it under its control. For Washington, Taiwan is not just a political partner, it's a strategic one. The island produces roughly 90% of the world's most advanced semiconductors. It's also a major US trade partner. Under the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act, the United States is required to help with Taiwan's defense, and it has done so consistently by approving billions of dollars in arms packages in recent years. This includes advanced missile systems, fighter jet upgrades, and maritime defense equipment. Well, even as China continues to oppose American weapons sales to Taiwan.
The U.S. side has openly announced a large-scale program to procure advanced weapons, which constitutes a serious violation of the One China principle and the 3 Sino-U.S. joint communiques. severely undermining China's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity. This significantly harms the peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait. This sends a grave and erroneous signal to the Taiwan independence and secessionist forces. China firmly opposes and strongly condemns this.
But while Congress signals firmness, the White House has walked a more calibrated line. In recent weeks, President Trump has resisted openly backing Japan, following Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi's diplomatic fallout with China over her comments on Taiwan. Well, this is despite the US President's open endorsement of Takaichi in the recent Snap polls that she won by a landslide. Well, this hesitation has raised questions about how far Washington is actually willing to go when tensions spike in the region. The United States remains heavily dependent on China for rare earth minerals, critical components used in defense systems, electric vehicles, and advanced electronics. Any sharp escalation carries economic risks at home. So the Protect Taiwan bill includes a waiver, though. It gives the US president the power not to enforce part of the law if doing so is considered to be in the US national interest. Well, Taiwan has welcomed the legislation, calling it proof of enduring cross-party support in Washington. But the broader question remains unresolved. Is the United States preparing for economic confrontation or crafting leverage to prevent one? Russia is clamping down on another global tech giant. This time it's WhatsApp. The Meta-owned messaging platform says Moscow has fully blocked its services in the country, and this decision could affect over 100 million users. But this isn't just about one app. It's about how the country, led by President Vladimir Putin, has been steadily reworking its digital space. According to WhatsApp, Russian authorities are trying to push users away from the platform, preferring people to use a state-backed messaging app. WhatsApp says this undermines privacy, but Russian officials argue foreign tech firms must comply with local laws. It's the latest front in a long-running battle. Before WhatsApp, it was Telegram facing the crackdown. And on Tuesday, Russia's internet watchdog announced that access to Telegram will be restricted because Telegram has failed to remove what Russia deems to be terrorist content. Users say they have already noticed a difference.
Yes, the last 2 days Telegram has been loading slowly. Every day. It's the only messenger I use in everyday life. We have a different one for work anyways. I'll have to stay out of touch. I'm not planning to do that for now. I'm not considering it for myself.
I was just discussing this with a friend who also runs a business that relies heavily on Telegram, and now we're thinking about it. Obviously, any solutions will be makeshift, some apps of our own, some solutions, other measures. We'll figure it out and get creative. Is this bad overall? Of course it's bad.
Russia's fight with Telegram dates back to 2018. Moscow tried to block it after the platform refused to hand over encryption keys to security services. But Russians kept using the app through workarounds. By 2020, the Kremlin quietly lifted the ban, but then came 2022 and the war in Ukraine. Russia blocked Facebook and Instagram, accusing Meta of extremist activity. X, formerly known as Twitter, was also restricted. Apple and Google, too, were pressured to remove apps and content. YouTube has also been accused of waging an information war. And the broader policy is simple: digital sovereignty. The idea is that Russia should be able to control its own information flows and not rely on Western technology. For Russia, this is about national security in a world where the social media landscape is an important part of soft power for countries around the globe. Rights groups argue that each ban or restriction narrows the space for dissent. And caught in the middle of this digital war are ordinary citizens. So from Meta to Telegram to Apple, Moscow's message is simple: operate under Russian rules or face the consequences. WhatsApp is not the first target and may not be the last. So the question is, does more domestic filtering of the internet make a country safer? Or does it make the internet less global or more open to government interference? For the Russian authorities, at least, the answer is clear. But for ordinary citizens, communicating online may become a lot more murky. And now our final story today. Sometimes the internet doesn't argue about the game. It argues about who's allowed to celebrate it. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella is facing racist backlash online after congratulating the Seattle Seahawks on their Super Bowl win and calling Seattle his hometown. Instead of football talk, social media users questioned his identity, pointed to his Indian roots and suggesting he didn't belong. So tonight we ask, in a global world, who gets to decide where home really is?
In the age of social media, even a simple congratulations can turn into a cultural flashpoint. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella found that out the hard way after posting a cheerful message, celebrating the Seattle Seahawks Super Bowl victory. In the tweet, Nadella referred to Seattle as his hometown and his city. For most sports fans, it was a routine moment of civic pride. However, for some corners of the internet, it became entirely about racism. Within hours, replies flooded in. They were not about football, but about identity. Users dragged his heritage into what was meant to be a celebratory post. Most of the replies quickly fixated on Nadella's Indian roots, with users questioning his reference to a hometown. One user pointed out that the image in the tweet did not resemble Hyderabad. Another reacted with a shocked face emoji next to the word hometown. A different commenter wrote, "Your hometown is Hyderabad, bruh." Some responses turned accusatory, with one person claiming, "But your hometown is somewhere in India, and your people are Indians. That's why you discriminate against American workers." Others simply reminded him he is Indian, while one user even urged him to stop supporting the Trump regime. However, not all reactions were hostile. One wrote, "Big moment for the city." Another added, "The energy in the city right now is unreal." A different user praised the winning team's defense, while someone else commented, "What an inspiring way to end the season."
I'm really pleased to announce today that
Nevertheless, the irony is difficult to miss. Nadella is a U.S. citizen by naturalization. Born in India, he moved to the United States for higher education in the 1980s. The tech leader has lived in the Seattle area for over 30 years and is widely known as a devoted supporter of local teams. By any practical definition, residence, work, and community, he is firmly rooted in the city. Decades later, he has become one of the most influential business leaders of the 21st century, leading Microsoft through its cloud transformation and reshaping the company's culture. And yet, a simple tweet was enough to reopen one glaring question: who decides who gets to belong where? The backlash also ignored an idea Nadella himself often embraces. Identity is not singular. In a 2014 interview, he said his upbringing in India shaped his leadership deeply. In 2022, he was awarded the Padma Bhushan. This is India's third highest civilian honor. For Nadella, it appears heritage and hometown are not competing truths. They coexist. In the end, Nadella's tweet was not really about football. It became about the meaning of home. After 3 decades in Seattle, building a company that shapes digital life worldwide, the question raised online was surprisingly outdated. Can a person belong to a place they weren't born in?
That's it on the show today. We'll be back tomorrow at the same time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye. The world doesn't fit in boxes, so why should your news? From battlefields to negotiation tables, from internet outrage to real-world injustice.